Welcome everyone to the Hurting Humanity channel. An October surprise is imminent. Hillary Clinton is warning that there'll be a big surprise this October that will distort and pervert Kamala Harris. And I'm going to play for you this speech, this interview that Hillary Clinton gave. And I want you to listen to a few things. Number one being that they were comparing Hillary Clinton to the goddess Cassandra, because it's very interesting, the connection between Cassandra and Apollo. And if a lot of you have been listening to some of the stuff that's out there in regards to Donald Trump and Apollo and his apartment building and all the stuff in it that pays homage to the god Apollo, the Greek god Apollo, well, it's awfully interesting hearing Hillary Clinton compare herself to the goddess Cassandra. But of course, the other thing that I'm really covering this for, and I have to be very careful with what I say, is the reference to a pizza place. A reference to a pizza place, of course, for those of you that don't know, really what occurred back in 2016 set the precedent for everything we see now with censorship. And it wasn't a government honey trap. It was them caught with their hands in the cookie jar, because what they did is they put out controlled WikiLeaks, but they didn't expect people to actually connect some of the individuals in those WikiLeaks to individuals who were running ping pong parlors in Washington, D.C. They didn't expect people to actually go through 10 years worth of social media posts and see some of the disturbing things that were out there. They didn't expect people to look at all those buildings and all those art galleries that surrounded that pizza place and begin to figure out that there was something suspicious going on there. So the government immediately tried to discredit all of the stuff that was out there circulating on the internet because they didn't expect it, because it was a very organic movement. One that a guy like me, or sounds a lot like me, was involved in. And what happened was the government created a hijacking of that movement. The government, because of that, sent in an actor to the pizza place to make it seem like a false flag event. And from that moment on, the Q movement was formed to lead people away from the truth movement, because people were realizing that the left and the right were actually working together, that the left and the right were actually responsible for all of this that she's referencing with the pizza place going on, because they were doing it together. And what the Q movement did was it started feeding people government-created honey traps. It started giving people these things like flight logs, and it started giving people these things like Diddy's guest lists and all the stuff involving Diddy now. And that's really what this is leading towards. But listen to this speech. And again, this tells us, we all know that there is going to be one guarantee at the end of this fake election on November 5th, that one side is going to fully deny the results of the election. That is the guarantee that I will tell everybody out there, that if somehow Donald Trump is put in power, the Democrats will not believe it. The Democratic voters will not believe it. They will believe that Russia or some other country got involved and rigged the election. If Kamala Harris wins, then of course the conservatives will not believe it. And in fact, the conservatives will call for a digital ID. And I'll get into that in more detail in a lot of videos leading up to November 5th. But look at Hillary, listen to Hillary, and of course referencing the pizza place. And this is what I talked about when all this stuff went down. The way that it's mentioned, right? They use verbiage like saying like, oh yeah, you know, we were doing that in the basement of a pizza place. And the crowd out there in attendance at this actually laughs. They actually laugh. And that is what psychological ops are all about. They've taken serious topics. They've taken things that most civilians, if they actually looked at the stuff presented by people like me, would go, holy crap. That is very bizarre. If that was my neighbor posting those things, I would call the police on them. But because it's politics, because they control the narrative, and because they use humor and they put sentences together like, oh yeah, they were doing it out of the basement of a pizza parlor, and then they keep repeating it, you actually get an audience that's conditioned to laugh at such a disgusting, serious topic. Here is the speech.
You liken yourself to Cassandra, the Greek mythological figure who could see the future and the prophecies, but was never believed. Putting that Cassandra hat on for the moment, but we're listening. What is something you see happening in the near future that we should be taking more seriously?
Well, I do think that the press needs a consistent, the press that's not supporting Trump blatantly, very persistently, the press that's trying to be the press, be objective, be, reporting the facts. The press needs a consistent narrative about the danger that Trump poses. Because, people may still look at the danger and say, I don't care. It doesn't affect me. I'm going to vote for him for X, Y, or Z. But okay. But at least people need to be woken up and given the facts about what he has done, is saying, and would do. And I anticipate that, something will happen in October, as it always does. The Russians, as I said earlier, are very active in this election. We know the Iranians are active as well. Chinese uses TikTok, or they certainly did against Biden and for Trump. I think they're a little less pro-Trump right now. So you look at where people get their information, and they get their information largely from social media. And so the campaign is doing the best job it can to combat that, combat both domestic and foreign false disinformation. But I anticipate there will be a full court press in October. The digital airwaves will be filled. And why does that matter? Because the press that is pro-Trump anyway, oftentimes stories are put on digitally that then are picked up by, let's say, at Fox and others. And then those stories are stories, so the mainstream press reports on them, and so that story then takes on a life of its own. There will be concerted efforts to distort and pervert Kamala Harris, who she is, what she stands for, what she's done. The crazy story about me running a child trafficking operation out of a basement of a pizzeria, don't laugh. It was a huge story. And it got one young man in North Carolina to get in his car with his, assault rifle and drive up to liberate these non-existent children and shoot up a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. This is dangerous stuff. It starts online, often on the dark web. It migrates. It's picked up by the pro-Trump media. It's then reported on by everybody else, which makes sure it has about 100% coverage. And people believe it. So I don't know what it's going to be, but it will be something, and we'll have to work very, very hard to make sure that it is exposed as the lie that it is. The crazy story about me running a child trafficking operation out of a basement of a pizzeria, don't laugh. It was a huge story. And it got one young man in North Carolina to get in his car with his, assault rifle and drive up to liberate these non-existent children and shoot up a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. This is dangerous stuff.
So, of course, they're telling you, and they're bringing attention to that again because they want you to believe that that entire story was something that was created by Russia, it was created by disinformation. I love how they're referencing the dark web when all of this stuff was really exposed in the first place on platforms like YouTube, where people at the time had free speech. Since then, of course, we know that their number one priority in the world is removing any information out there that exposes what all these agendas are that are going on, like Agenda 2030 and the sustainable goals, right? We know that calling out all these events that happen at schools is a big priority for them to cancel out. But really, it's about canceling out speech so they can protect themselves. They got so concerned with how viral all of that stuff went because it wasn't because people were going, oh, wow, I want to watch crazy conspiracy kooks on the internet, because everybody who saw some of the stuff that was getting tweeted out, posted on Instagram, every single person, even people out there who are not into conspiracies, holy crap. Holy crap. They didn't care about the left and the right. They cared about justice. They cared about, well, there's something going on here, and we need to figure out what it is. And then, of course, the government did what they always do, right? They stepped in and they created a CIA-controlled movement called Q. They plastered it all over the news, giving attention to the movement so that people out there would lump people like me and you into the Q movement. And, of course, anybody out there that now hears people like us talk thinks that we're a part of Q. They think that we've all been lumped in to be MAGA supporters or Trump supporters when none of us really are, at least any of us who are actually awake fully and understand the left-right paradigm. So, of course, the people out there laugh, and then referencing the dark web, as if this stuff was on the dark web. When we all think of the dark web, what do we think of? We think of places that we never even would want to go and investigate because it's so disturbing. I think of that Frazzle. Anyone out there remember that Frazzle drip thing? That's what I think of when I think of the dark web. But she's referencing the dark web as if truther channels are actually the dark web. People who are questioning the narrative, people who are questioning stuff that people like, the guy who ran the pizza place were posting on their Instagram accounts. That's apparently the new dark web. We're the new dark web. And it shouldn't surprise us because they've convinced many people out there that we're the new terror threat in America. And, these people out there, that part of why the people out there think that is because they automatically lump us into MAGA. If the majority of people out there understood that we were actually speaking against both parties and trying to expose this psychological operation known as the left-right paradigm, well, they would probably listen and say, well, let me see what this is about. Now, obviously, most of these people are communists and don't know it, so they're very, very, very affiliated with their party and defending of their party. But there's a big difference between saying that you don't vote for Trump, you're not a Trump supporter, so these people might go, oh, okay, well, he's not a Trump supporter, he's against Donald Trump, maybe I'll listen to what he has to say, then automatically thinking, well, they're talking about a conspiracy, so they're MAGA, they're Q, they're a detriment to society, right? And they've done that, obviously, deliberately. The other thing I mentioned was the Cassandra thing, right? For those of you that don't know, Cassandra was a priestess of Apollo, a princess and a princess of Troy, who had the gift of prophecy. So referring to herself as a prophet, of course, she was cursed by Apollo so that no one would believe her predictions. Her life was marred with tragedy and endless moments of duh and I told you so. They call it the Cassandra complex, refers to individuals whose valid concerns are either disbelieved or invalidated, right? So that also probably tells us that the things that Hillary are saying will likely come true, that there will be some type of October surprise, which I'll get into in a few minutes here of what it could potentially be. But there's probably almost most definitely going to be, because remember, these people think of themselves as these gods and goddesses. And it's very interesting that Hillary chooses Cassandra, who, again, had the gift of prophecy, they claim, which is not true, obviously false prophecy, if anything. And Apollo, because remember, Apollo, many people out there believe that it is Trump who believes himself to be Apollo. If you've never seen Donald Trump's apartment, it is filled with Apollo pictures, Apollo statues, and we know that Apollo is affiliated with gold, right? Because of the sun. Apollo personified the qualities of the sun with his glowing golden hair, and like Helios, he was responsible for bringing the sun to the earth each day while riding on a golden chariot. Because of this, he was often described as bright and pure, right? So for those of you that don't know, not just Donald Trump's obsession with gold, right? His golden apartment, which he has these portraits of Apollo in his apartment, he has these statues of Apollo in his apartment. But this whole theme of Trump being orange is supposed to really be Trump being golden. So we always hear how they call Donald Trump the orange man, orange like the sun. And don't you think somebody would tell Donald Trump, hey, Donald, you look really strange, always looking really weirdly orange, and the fact that he still dyes his hair as well. I mean, there's a lot of connections between Donald Trump and Apollo. So very interesting wording that Clinton is comparing herself to Cassandra, and we've all heard the theories about Trump and sun worship, and of course, the golden obsession of Donald Trump, including that statue I talked about recently, which of course is long removed, of Donald Trump that they rolled out after the assassination attempt, where people were posing for pictures with this golden Trump statue, Trump with the golden sneakers that he's released, right? So there's definitely a connection between Donald Trump and gold, and of course Apollo and gold. And a lot of people believe that the theme of orange that Donald Trump has, and this whole narrative that the Democrats put out there calling him orange, mocking him as orange, and the fact that he continues to go out there looking like he's wearing self-tanner, has a lot to do with Apollo. Now, the big surprise that they're probably referencing here could in fact be a connection between Kamala Harris and the stuff with Diddy. That's at least what they're putting out there right now. And they're putting out fake pictures, right? So this leads to more what? Censorship, because people are putting out pictures of Diddy with Kamala. And then, of course, they're getting fact-checked, and they're saying that they're making this up. People are photoshopping them together. And, of course, we know how hell-bent they are in getting more restrictions online, but that all leads to a digital ID. So I'm sure there'll be false stories out there, but, of course, the truest story that's out there, and I don't just say that because I was somebody who was largely responsible, or largely involved, I should say, with a large following at the time in all of that stuff that occurred at the pizzeria. If you go through my videos, they will blow your mind, the stuff that was being exposed at the time. This wasn't something that was fed like a flight lock. What this was the WikiLeaks that came out. And of course, we all looked at the WikiLeaks and we all said, well, they're only releasing these WikiLeaks because they want them out there. However, they weren't fully leaked by the mainstream media. They were quietly out there and available for people. They weren't putting this on headline news. You literally had to go through these emails if you wanted to find anything inside of the WikiLeaks. Now, I'm not saying that the leaks weren't controlled or they were controlled, but if you actually started looking at the mentioning, there was a mentioning of this place casually in there. Okay, and the mentioning of the owner casually in there. Then if you went through the Instagram account, it would really, if you want to look at it and say, well, they put that entire thing out there for everybody, because that was the narrative at the time. A lot of truthers turned on the story because they said, well, they put it out there so that they could start the censorship. They put nothing out there. They didn't blast this all over the place. What happened was channels like somebody who sounded a lot like me were getting millions of views every single day, looking at the ownership of the property surrounding it, the Masonic Lodge at the end of the road, the art galleries, the tunnel system, and then all the signs and symbols that were all around the places, the businesses associated with that pizza place. Then we looked at all the stuff with the pizza place, and you saw, wow, look at this guy's on the top 30 list of most influential people in Washington, the guy who runs a pizza place. And we all started using common sense logic, right? Why would a guy who runs a pizza place be on the top 30? Then, of course, you saw just some Instagram pictures, even at the White House in the middle of the night. And you say, why is this guy in the White House? And you saw Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama. And you saw all of these things that you said to yourself, you know what? They didn't expect anybody to go down this road. And they so quickly created a false flag around it. They created a false flag within a month. And then they started talking about it out in the mainstream media, trying to discredit anyone who was discussing it. And of course, boom, censorship hit. Anybody who discussed it was removed, and the rest is history. And since then, they've called the movement Q, even though none of us had anything to do with Q at the time. They called the movement Q. And ever since then, everybody out there, if they hear any conspiracy, they link all of us to that, a government-controlled movement. Because the government's obviously behind Q. Anyone out there that doesn't think so at this point, I mean, you're just kidding yourself. You're just kidding yourself if you think this information's coming out. You're kidding yourself if you think there's somebody on the inside who's, what do you think? He's hiding behind VPNs? They control the internet. There's no hiding from them. They tell you things like VPNs can hide you. You can't really hide from the deep state, okay? You might be able to hide from, stalkers on the internet with a VPN, but you're not going to hide from Big Brother, okay? They see all. They know all. So Hillary says there's going to be a big October surprise. I was surprised that they actually brought attention to this again, but when you see the reaction of the audience and you see how everybody out there just cracks up at this idea, you see how easily, mind controlled they are, because they didn't even need to be presented anything. And if they were, and they listen to someone like me, they go, yeah, he's making some valid points. I mean, these are weird pictures on Instagram. They're some of the most disturbing things you can imagine. We're talking slices of pizza over little ones, you know what's. And we were just going, if your neighbor posted this, right, we were using common sense logic, taking people out of the left, right, saying, look, if you saw your neighbor post this on their Instagram account, would you call the police? And 10 out of 10 people said, yeah. And would there be an investigation to see what this person's involved? Yes, there would be. Yes, there would. So they made it into a left-right thing, which means that 50% of the population would automatically believe what the government said because, of course, they have to defend their party. They're communists. They have to say, oh, it's about voting. It's about Trump. It's make-believe. Instead of being about people, about children, protecting them, right? So that's how they're able to psychologically mold people. And even all these years later, they laugh out in the audience. But I talked about it recently in a video, and I said, you can go up to somebody and bring this topic up, and the majority of people don't have a clue about it. I mean, there's a lot of people, they go, what's that? What's that? Because at that time, conspiracies were still, or truth was still kind of like very, underground. They didn't make it mainstream. Now they've made all these conspiracies mainstream. So everybody knows about the Diddy. Everybody knows about Jeffrey. We hear them talk about Jeffrey at all these award shows, on all these talk shows. That's deliberately done. They wouldn't even bring attention to it. Like I said, he would have been, if they want him gone, they would have whacked him. They wouldn't even have done a trial. None of the information would have gotten out. This was totally different. You didn't see any of these Instagram posts in the national news. You didn't see, all you saw was them cleaning it up and saying that narrative of, oh yeah, they're doing this underneath the pizza place. These people are out of their minds, right? Don't forget the donut shops that we all exposed as well. Really what happened is a lot of people realized, wow, there's all these fronts as businesses that, you would think with common sense, you say, how are they even affording the rent in places like that, let alone the publicity they're getting? You look at, the food that was being served at the pizza place and you go, oh my gosh, this is the best pizza in town. You see all the news anchors from CNN dining there with their families. I mean, the stuff involved, the bands that were involved. Who's ever forgetting that? The bands, I have that video up on the website too. The bands that were involved at that place, the disgusting stuff going. I mean, it was so dark, so sick. I'll never forget it. I mean, obviously I won't forget it, but I hate when people say that because they're like, oh, I'll never forget it when someone dies. And it's like, well, of course you're not going to forget it. But I mean, I'll never forget the mental state that I was in when I was seeing this stuff, because my awakening, I already was awake. It just went to different levels of like, looking at things and, just starting to understand, wow, how deep this thing really, really goes. So again, my point being, while I'm rambling here, is that none of that stuff ever made the news, right? Lists and those things they talk about. This stuff, they just made up this sentence they kept repeating about being under a pizza place, and then what did they do from there? Oh, they created a false flag, and then they just immediately just said how dangerous everybody out there is who talks about it. They didn't say anything. They didn't say, hey, why don't we be journalists and look at some of these posts? Because again, if your neighbor posted it, your cousin posted it, your brother posted it, you'd be suspicious. And people would say, well, why didn't you call the police if you saw that your husband was posting things on his Instagram account with slices of food over nude people? You'd say, people would be like, you should have done something. You saw it, you didn't call the police, right? That's what somebody would say in real life. But when it came to this, they didn't even want people out there to know that that's what was going on, because left or right, a lot of parents out there would have said, oh, this is revolting. There's got to be something going on here. Maybe it doesn't involve Hillary, but it's something going on here. I mean, of course, it did involve her, because her foundation was right across the road. And of course, her connection to the guy and all the people that were involved in the play. I mean, it was really just quite the horror show. So anyway, folks, just to recap, the October surprise is potentially coming. According to Cassandra, Hillary Clinton, referring to herself as the goddess Cassandra, who was cursed by Apollo, who, ironically, right, I'm sure it's ironic, Hillary Clinton's enemy or known enemy is Donald Trump, even though they're friends. We've seen them in pictures. They're, of course, friends. Because remember, when Trump was put in power, wasn't he supposed to arrest Hillary and drain the swamp? Oh, right, that got dropped. But of course, you see how the mind control works. All the MAGA people just go, well, he couldn't really arrest her? Oh, man, it's absolutely incredible. October surprise, folks. Be ready for it. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families, as always.